They are not names that appear on ballots. They do not give speeches before the people. They do not descend into the squares or get dirty on the battlefield. But they were and continue to be behind almost everything that moves history. It doesn't matter whether they were born among dunes, palaces, ghettos or fortresses. They all understood the same thing, that real power does not always lie with those who command, but with those who define the rules of the game. This is a story of design, of how a few families plotted routes we followed and used religions, banks, marriages, art, oil, exams, monks, puppet kings, and when necessary, knives. They're the masters of the thread, the hands behind the curtain. These are the 10 most powerful dynasties and families of all time. Florence, 15th century. Money flows and ideas thrive. Among merchants and artists, one family stands out, the Medici, bankers and politicians. They didn't just fund beauty, they designed it, using art as a tool for control and influence. It all begins with Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, founder of the Medici Bank, son of a modest money changer, not a nobleman. Giovanni used his financial and quiet political skills to become one of Europe's richest men. By discreetly funding papal campaigns, wars and alliances, he built one of the most powerful banks in Europe. But it would be his grandson, Cosimo de' Medici, who consolidated control of Florence, using an interesting and innovative precept, prestige. Cosimo finances churches, monasteries and libraries. He founded the Platonic Academy, sponsored scholars who translated ancient texts, rescuing Plato and other pagans under the Christian mantle. But above all, he puts his seal on every public work. There is no art without his signature. There are no domes without his money. Florence becomes a covert propaganda gallery. Then came the brightest heir, Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent. He knows art speaks, so he backs young talents like Botticelli, who paints a pagan Venus with the face of a Medici woman. Every work, painting, sculpture, mass whispers the same message. The Medici aren't just wealthy, they're nearly divine. Rather than supporting Brunelleschi, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci for their artistic merits, they see it as an investment. The artists gain protection, resources and fame. In return, they create symbols of power that serve Medici interests, but their influence goes beyond art. The Medici family installed 2 popes, Leo X and Clement VII, in the Vatican, extending their influence from the streets of Florence to the throne rooms of St. Peter's. They brokered indulgences, councils and holy wars. They also produced queens, like Catherine de' Medici, who married the future King of France. In Paris, Catherine becomes regent, mother of 3 kings, architect of intrigues, religious wars and hidden pacts. The Medici weren't eternal, though it took over 3 centuries to bring them down. They survived waves of adversity, but their banking empire collapsed due to mismanaged foreign branches and unpaid royal loans. After Lorenzo the Magnificent's death, his son Piero failed to hold the people, the papacy and foreign powers together. The dynasty officially ended in 1737 with the death of Gian Gastone de' Medici, who left no heirs. The Medici saw the power of what's constantly seen, and that was their great conspiracy, crafting a visual narrative so beautiful and immersive that history remembers them as cultural royalty, not bankers turned politicians. They became the first marketing empire, the first branding dynasty. Every time someone enters the Sistine Chapel, admires the birth of Venus, or quotes Machiavelli, the Medici are there. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, oil flows like blood, and faith rules as law. This is the kingdom of the Al-Saud, a perfect conspiracy, the alliance of sword and sermon, wealth and spiritual control. It all begins in the 18th century, when Muhammad ibn Saud, a tribal chief from Central Arabia, meets an exiled preacher named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. The latter had a mission: to purify Islam, to eliminate superstitions, shrines and corrupt customs. His doctrine was strict, austere and tolerant Wahhabism. And here the spark occurs. Ibn Saud offers military protection. Ibn Abd al-Wahhab offers religious legitimacy, a pact without signatures but stronger than any treaty. The Sauds conquer neighboring tribes, the Wahhabis declare it to be God's will. The sword cuts, the sermon justifies. For more than a century, this alliance dissolves and resurfaces, falls to the Ottoman Empire, is contained by the British, but never disappears. Until, in the chaos of the 20th century, a new Al-Saud leader appears on the scene, Abdulaziz ibn Saud. He unifies the land and renames it Saudi Arabia, the only country named after a family. But the real turning point comes in 1938, when Americans discover vast oil reserves beneath the desert. From then on, the Saudis no longer rely solely on Wahhabism for control. They gain the wealth, attention and protection of the West. In 1945, King Abdulaziz met with Franklin D. Roosevelt on the cruiser USS Quincy. There, in a meeting without the press or witnesses, they sealed the true pact of the 20th century, oil in exchange for protection. Saudi Arabia would be the energy supplier of the free world. In return, it would have eternal military support. And above all, no one would interfere in its internal politics. Since then, the Al-Sauds have ruled a state with a modern appearance, but a medieval soul. An absolute monarchy without parties, without elections, where the royal family holds thousands of positions, controls ministries, companies, universities, courts, and the clergy. Wahhabism, for its part, has not disappeared. It has become an ideological apparatus. It is preached in every mosque, taught in schools. It is exported with money throughout the Muslim world. Thousands of Quranic schools, imams and publications are financed with Saudi funds. The message is that loyalty to authentic Islam is loyalty to the Saudi throne. Outwardly, the kingdom appears moderate, an ally of the West, a tech investor, a counter-terrorism partner. But it plays a double game, modernizing economically while enforcing strict religious laws and repressing dissent. In 2018, the mask slipped when journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a regime critic, was murdered and dismembered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. On foreign soil, under orders of the CIA, linked to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And yet, the pact continues. The oil keeps flowing, the weapons keep selling. International conferences continue to welcome princes with a red carpet. The Al-Saud family achieved the unthinkable, shielding an absolute regime with religious legitimacy and international complicity. While other empires fall due to their excesses, they sustain their power by controlling two things, oil and Mecca. Meanwhile, the West looks the other way, because in this game, everyone wins. Everyone except those who dare to speak out. There wasn't always stability on the throne of England, but when the Tudors arrived, they brought something more powerful than peace: spectacle. The dynasty began with Henry VII, cold, calculating, a survivor of the bloody Wars of the Roses. Henry VII was a Welsh nobleman with a weak claim to the throne, exiled and persecuted, who emerged from the Civil War to become the unexpected founder of one of England's most iconic dynasties. The one who made the Tudors legend was his son, Henry VIII, feared, dramatic, and unforgettable. He began as the ideal king, young, charismatic, athletic, and a patron of the arts. But his obsession with a son set him on a path that would shake Europe's religious order. Married to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of the Catholic monarchs, Henry expected an heir. He only had one daughter named Mary. Time passed and then he met Anne Boleyn. He desired her, but to marry her, he had to get a divorce. The problem was that the Pope, divorce wasn't allowed. After repeated refusals, Henry VIII saw a deeper issue: control of faith. With one decree, he broke from Rome, created the Anglican Church, and made marriage a political tool. Unlike Luther's Reformation in Germany, England's was more strategic than theological. The game extended beyond desire. Henry seized church assets, expropriated monasteries, and took lands, turning heresy into profit. Nobles enriched themselves through the new distributions, and Henry believed he had secured the male heir he longed for, or so he thought. Paranoia gripped the king. 6 wives, 2 beheaded, a reformed church, hundreds of Catholics were executed. England was covered in fire, but the throne remained firm. Because behind the chaos there was the narrative. Henry used religion, law and art to build an image of absolute power. Then came his daughter, the one no one expected to reign, Elizabeth I, the daughter of the heretic. Young, female Protestant, she lived in a world of kings and popes, but her reign was even more brilliant than her father's. Elizabeth transformed her reign into a theatre of state. She dressed in symbolic jewels, used her virginity as a national legend, and appeared as a warrior goddess to her people. She controlled her image with surgical precision. She didn't need to marry, because she was already married to England. Under her rule, the Spanish Armada fell, trade and early imperialism grew, and culture thrived. Shakespeare, Marlowe and powerful propaganda emerged. But behind it all was fire. The Tudor order was built on betrayal. The Anglican Church was born from defiance, stability came through purging religious enemies, and royal decisions were driven more by strategy than faith. And yet, their legacy lives on. The Anglican Church remains, the British monarchy still draws from its symbols, and the notion that a ruler can reshape faith to secure power began with Henry VIII. For 3 centuries, the Romanovs embodied Russia, absolutism, autocracy and divine rule. From 1613 to 1917, they ruled millions from the Baltic to the Pacific through orthodoxy, force and obedience. But by the 20th century, the empire was cracking, poverty below, corruption above, and a weakened army. At its center, a weak Tsar, a fearful Tsarina, and a monk with a hypnotic gaze, Grigory Rasputin. The son of Siberian peasants, a self-taught healer, preacher, mystic, libertine, drunkard and prophet, a walking enigma. But his entry into history occurs through a crack in the wall of the empire. The young heir Alexei, son of Tsar Nicholas II, suffered from haemophilia, an incurable disease that caused him to bleed even from a simple fall. Doctors could not help. Despair reigned in the palace, until Rasputin arrived. They say that when he touched the boy, the fever subsided, that his voice calmed him, that his prayers stopped the bleeding. Miracle or suggestion, it didn't matter. Tsarina Alexandra Fyodorovna, German by birth and deeply devout, became convinced that Rasputin was a messenger from God to save her son and the throne. From then on, the monk began to grow. Rasputin held no official role, yet he influenced state decisions, appointed ministers, vetoed generals, and wandered the Winter Palace with the Tsarina's full protection. As Nicholas II fixated on war and divine duty, Rasputin became the most trusted voice at court. The nobility was outraged. The press called him corrupt, a sorcerer, a libertine. In St. Petersburg salons, whispers spread. The Tsar was bewitched. The Tsarina was his lover, and a Siberian madman controlled the throne. But the most serious thing wasn't the scandal. What was truly serious was the power vacuum. Russia entered the First World War ill-prepared. Millions died in the trenches. At home, hunger grew, strikes broke out, and while everything burned, Rasputin continued to decide, in the name of faith, who ruled. Then the elite acted. A conspiracy of nobles lured him to a palace. They offered him poisoned wine. He didn't die. They shot him. He remained standing. They shot him again. He fell. Then they threw him into the icy river. When they retrieved him, his lungs were full of water. He had drowned. He had stood up to the bitter end, but it was too late. Worn down by war, famine and tyranny, the people rose. In 1917, Nicholas II abdicated. Months later, the Romanovs were executed, wife, children all, shot in a basement. The empire didn't fall by force, but by a whisper. A mysterious monk became the symbol of Russian absolutism's collapse. Though the Bolsheviks took power with fire and steel, the revolution began quietly. In palace chambers, through letters, prayers and fear-driven choices. One of the world's oldest dynasties fell, not to armies, but to a sick child, a desperate mother, and a man who claimed to speak to God. In the 19th century, the world needed energy, light, movement, and industry. John D. Rockefeller saw opportunity. From Cleveland, he built Standard Oil, controlling not just oil but competition, suppliers, transport and distribution, a closed system. an invisible network of domination masked as efficiency. By 1880, he held 90% of US oil. No president, law, or press could stop him. He became the richest man on earth, perhaps ever. When the government broke up Standard Oil into 34 companies, Rockefeller did something smarter. He split the money but kept control. The shares stayed in his name and decisions still reached his desk. While attention shifted, his real empire began: strategic philanthropy. Founded in 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation became a tool to shape education, health, science, and global politics. It funded elite universities, built school systems for obedient, efficient workers, and led health campaigns while imposing biomedical models and controlling knowledge. It even helped found the World Health Organization. It's not that they concealed evil, it's that every charitable act placed them as an obligatory filter between power and the people, between need and response. It was a philanthropy that distributed resources and defined the rules of the game. After World War II, true power moved to the diplomatic chessboard. David Rockefeller, John Dee's grandson and Chase Manhattan banker, mastered quiet diplomacy. From the 1950s, he built ties with presidents, dictators, spies, and technocrats. He co-founded the Trilateral Commission, shaped policy through the Council on Foreign Relations, and fronted the secretive Bilderberg Group. Under his influence, institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and Bretton Woods system emerged, tools to stabilize the global economy and centralize decisions in the hands of a few countries and a few names. In 1973, David Rockefeller personally participated in the reorganization of the oil market after the oil crisis. Through discreet negotiations with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, he consolidated the petrodollar system. From then on, every nation in the world was required to use dollars to purchase energy. Thus, the US dollar became the global currency not out of trust, but out of necessity. And the financial system became a mechanism of geopolitical control. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller Foundation continued to fund medical research, health programs, climate change plans, educational institutions, and international organizations. Everything seemed beneficial. Everything seemed neutral. But in every agenda, there was an ideology. In every donation, a form of power. And in every advisory board, a custodian of the global model they themselves had helped write. The Rockefellers designed the world through modernity, using only debt, diplomacy, and capital. From the outside, without holding public office, they defined policies, maps, treaties, and consensus. As presidents rotated, they remained. As crises repeated, they reappeared, always philanthropists, never elected, always listened to. The Rockefellers were and remain the game masters of this world. In 1299, a small Turkish tribe with no crown or city raised the crescent moon and the name of Allah. Their leader, Osman, was a minor frontier warrior, but his vision surpassed all rivals. His descendants would conquer Constantinople, destroy the Byzantine Empire, besiege Vienna, and rule across 3 continents. They founded the Ottoman Empire and held it for over 6 centuries. But their greatest act of power was deeper, transforming religion into a throne and the throne into an altar, a perfect fusion of faith, army, and state. From 1517, after conquering Mecca and Medina, the sultans became caliphs of Sunni Islam, claiming spiritual rule over millions. Unlike the Abbasids, they wielded real military power, especially through the Janissaries, Christian boys taken as slaves, converted to Islam, and trained to serve with absolute loyalty. Brutal, ruthless, and devoted, they were the Sultan's sword and shield. In Constantinople, they ruled over Christians and Jews through separate legal systems. One could be a subject without being Muslim, ensuring taxes, stability, and an unmatched era of peace. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire peaked. Law, art, and expansion flourished, but power also shifted. Roxolana, a former slave turned queen, broke tradition by marrying Suleiman, securing her son's succession and eliminating rivals. The palace became a court of intrigue, the harem its command center. Thus began the Sultanate of Women. For nearly a century, imperial women ruled from the shadows, manipulating viziers, guiding wars and ordering executions. Meanwhile, the Janissaries grew uncontrollable, blackmailing and killing sultans. The empire decayed from within. Europe industrialized, the Ottomans didn't. Nationalism rose, they clung to the empire. By the 19th century, they were known as the sick man of Europe. Yet they endured. Then came the Great War. Failed alliances, defeats, collapse. In 1924, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the caliphate, dissolved the dynasty, banned royal titles, erased tombs, and silenced prayers for the sultans. For the first time in 600 years, Sunni Islam had no throne. The House of Osman disappeared, officially, but not entirely. Because the map we know today, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, the Balkans, is a skeleton of the Ottoman Empire. The current wars, religious conflicts, and artificial borders are all a part of its heritage. The Ottoman system wasn't flawless. They ruled mostly through silence, wisdom, and subtlety. And when they couldn't anymore, they vanished. No empire lasts 6 centuries and vanishes without a trace, and no dynasty that links its name to God is easily forgotten. For over 6 centuries, the Habsburgs ruled Austria, Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, Bohemia, Hungary and more by turning dynastic unions into a political strategy. Belligerant Ali to Felix Austria Nube, let others make war. You, happy Austria, marry. More than a motto, it was a blueprint. By marrying into French, Italian, Hungarian and Spanish royalty, the Habsburgs bound half of Europe to a single house. By the 16th century, Emperor Charles V, grandson of the Catholic monarchs and the German Habsburgs, ruled an empire where the sun never set. Spain, America, Flanders, Austria, Naples, the Holy Roman Empire. But as their power spread outward, their foundation began to crack within. The Habsburgs' obsession with bloodline purity led to generations of inbreeding, marriages between cousins, uncles and nieces that caused physical and mental deterioration. The most visible sign was the Habsburg jaw, a severe facial deformity. But the damage ran deeper: cognitive issues, sterility, and eventual biological collapse. The most tragic example was Charles II of Spain, the last of the Spanish Habsburgs. Sick, deformed, and unable to rule or produce heirs, he was the product of a family tree so closed that his mother was also his father's niece. His death in 1700, childless, triggered the War of the Spanish Succession and ended the dynasty's Spanish branch. But meanwhile, in Vienna, the dynasty lived on. Empress Maria Theresa, one of the few women to rule the empire directly, understood blood politics better than anyone. She married her 16 children into royal houses across Europe. Her most famous daughter, Marie Antoinette, would end up beheaded in the French Revolution, a symbol of the end of an era and the price of inherited arrogance. The Habsburgs turned their family name into a web, woven for generations, sustained by birthright agreements and marital alliances. In the secret archives of their chancelleries, love did not exist, only convenience, control and power. Their principle was never to invade territories, but to inherit empires through an infallible system. Their strategy was as brilliant as it was dangerous. For the blood that crowned them was also the blood that betrayed them. The Qing Dynasty, China's last great imperial house, was a system of total control over bodies, minds and souls. For nearly 300 years, they ruled 400 million people without needing to conquer every corner by force. Their strategy, shaping how people thought to match the emperor's will. The Qing were Manchus, not Han Chinese, an ethnic group from the northeast who invaded China in 1644. Their arrival was violent, but their rule was strategic. They adopted the Ming Dynasty's Confucian system, keeping exams, hierarchies and rituals to legitimize their power. They changed the court language and imposed the queue as a symbol of submission, but preserved the ideological structure that ensured mass obedience. The key was Confucianism, a doctrine focused on order and hierarchy, not salvation. The Qing made it a state doctrine. Every official had to master classical texts and pass exams that measured obedience over talent. Power required thinking like the emperor. The bureaucracy became a machine of ideological uniformity. Vast, diverse in people, but governed by the same books, rituals and worldview. The Qing also wielded violence when needed, crushing internal revolts like the Three Feudatories and the devastating Taiping Rebellion. They fought off Russians, Mongols and Tibetans. At its peak, the Qing Empire was larger than Rome, more populous than Europe, and more stable than any Christian kingdom. Its most emblematic figure was Emperor Kangxi, who reigned for 61 years and was as skilled with the pen as with the sword. Cultured, polyglot and a strategist, he knew how to balance military power with cultural dominance. Under him and his grandson Qianlong, the empire reached its maximum territorial expansion. But it also began to swell and harden. The problem with any perfect system is its inability to adapt. By turning Confucianism into state doctrine, the Qing stifled innovation and rejected European science, the Industrial Revolution and modernization. As the world changed, they clung to a static, self-sufficient order until it collapsed. In the 19th century, Europeans arrived with cannons, unequal treaties and opium. The Opium Wars marked the first crack. The Qing, used to commanding, failed to negotiate, and the century of humiliation began. Ports were seized, conditions imposed, and tributes demanded. The emperor remained, but China unraveled. The final blow came from within. The 1911 revolution toppled the dynasty and ended the imperial system. The last emperor, Puyi, a powerless child, was deposed without war or resistance. A centuries-old system collapsed under its own rigidity. Europe, 19th century. Napoleon advances and the old order trembles. Amidst the chaos, there is a family that doesn't need thrones to rule. In every court, in every capital, their agents are already there, taking notes, observing, investing, the Rothschilds. It all begins in the Frankfurt Jewish ghetto, amidst narrow alleys and laws that limited the public life of Jews. There, Meyer Amschel Rothschild began modestly, but with rare coin expertise, he earned the trust of the Prince of Hesse Castle. When the prince fled Napoleon, he left his fortune with Meyer, who moved and multiplied it, using it to build his bank and network. For Meyer, gold was access, and information was power. He sent his 5 sons to the major capitals of Europe: Nathan to London, James to Paris, Salomon to Vienna, Karl to Naples, and Amschel remained in Frankfurt. Connected by their own messengers, ciphers, and absolute family loyalty, they wove a financial network that no state could match. Swift, discreet, and borderless, more effective than any official diplomacy. During the Napoleonic Wars, this network became essential. The Rothschilds financed armies, organized gold transfers, and supplied credit to entire governments. Nathan from London was the linchpin of many of these operations. When Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, the Rothschilds already knew the outcome before the British Parliament. This speed gave them an advantage in the market. They sold bonds to sow panic, then bought into the collapse, and when victory was announced, their fortune had multiplied. That was the birth of the Rothschild myth, predicting victories before battles ended. They financed the Austro-Hungarian Empire, built railways across Europe, helped construct the Suez Canal, and propped up the Ottoman Empire for decades. More than bankers, they were financial architects of geopolitical balance, knowing when to collect from a collapsing empire and what it cost to keep one standing. They were Jews on a Christian continent, alien by religion but indispensable because of their capital. That made them a symbol and a target. As their power grew, so did theories. They were accused of dominating governments, provoking wars, and controlling history from the shadows. Select and specific groups held them up as the perfect example of the global Jew. What worried everyone wasn't their wealth. Too many people in the world have wealth. What was disturbing was their silent rule. They wielded sovereign debt as an instrument of pressure. If a country wanted credit, it had to go through their offices, and those offices spoke to each other faster and more loyally than any government embassy. With the 20th century came total war, pogroms, and the nationalization of many European banks. The Rothschilds' visible power was reduced, but their structure had transformed the financial world. Debt bonds, international banking, transnational investments, family networks of banking control, all of this was born, in large part, at their tables. The Rothschilds established the first model of a modern financial empire, a system that could move freely, multiply without territory, outlast kings, wars and revolutions, and transcend the deaths of its oldest members of its dynasty to be passed on to the younger ones who followed in line. They replaced crowns with signatures, and they lent to kings who requested support for their proclamation. When the world expanded along with its communication and the global system began to spin faster, they had already collected in advance. Before we reveal the number one most powerful family of all time, let's take a look at some honorable mentions. Bonaparte family imposed the Napoleonic Code, redrew Europe's map post-revolution, and placed relatives on multiple thrones. Abbasid Caliphate founded Baghdad, led the Islamic Golden Age, and modeled centralized theocratic rule for over 5 centuries. Julio-Claudian family consolidated the Roman Principate, established lifelong emperorship, and dominated the Mediterranean in the 1st century. Han Dynasty unified China, opened the Silk Road, and set the imperial model that endured for 2 millennia. Genghis Khan, born Temujin around 1162 in Mongolia, came from a minor noble family exiled after his father's murder. Raised in poverty, he rose through alliances, betrayals, and battles to unify the Mongol clans. In 1206, he was declared universal ruler, the name history remembers. Genghis Khan's strategy combined mobility, terror, and a merit-based command. His army, organized from units of 10 to 10,000, operated with autonomy and coordination. Using spies, fast messaging, and advanced logistics, he unified Mongolia, crossed the Great Wall, defeated the Shia and Jin in China, and crushed the Muslim states of Central Asia, including the Khwarezmian Empire, all in under 30 years. By the time he died in 1227, he had laid the foundation for what would become the largest contiguous land empire in history. His descendants continued the expansion. His son Ögedei advanced into Russia and Eastern Europe. Batu Khan, Genghis's grandson, founded the Golden Horde and imposed tribute on the Russian principalities. Hulagu Khan, another grandson, conquered Baghdad in 1258, destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate, and founded the Ilkhanate in Persia. Kublai Khan, also his grandson, completed the conquest of China and founded the Yuan Dynasty, which lasted from 1271 to 1368, ruling as emperor from Beijing. The Mongol Empire reached its greatest extent under Kublai, stretching from the Sea of Japan to Eastern Europe and from Siberia to southern China and Mesopotamia. Administratively, it was divided into 4 great khanates: the Golden Horde, Russia; the Ilkhanate, Iran; the Chagatai Khanate, Central Asia; and the Great Khanate, China and Mongolia. They established the Pax Mongolica, a period of stability that facilitated trade, communication, and the migration of technologies and knowledge between Europe and Asia. The Silk Road flourished under their protection. Gunpowder, the compass, paper, and Chinese banking systems spread westward. In turn, irrigation techniques, Islamic medicine, and astronomical knowledge circulated eastward. Religious tolerance was official policy under the Mongols, allowing Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Confucians, and shamans to coexist. Local rulers kept their positions if they acknowledged the Khan's authority and paid tribute. While the Mongol elite stayed nomadic, they relied on Persian, Chinese, and Uyghur bureaucrats to govern. The Yam, A relay-based messenger network enabled rapid communication across the empire, one of the first global logistical systems ensuring military coordination, tribute collection, and administrative control on a massive scale. The decline began with the death of Möngke Khan in 1259, which led to succession disputes. Internal wars between branches of the family fragmented the empire. By the 14th century, each khanate functioned as an autonomous entity. The impact of the Mongol Empire was structural as well as territorial. Eurasia was, for a brief period, a unified space under an unprecedented architecture of power, far greater in influence than any other on this list. The descendants of Genghis Khan, who became known as the House of Borjigin, literally transformed the politics of Europe and Asia for centuries to come. Today, an estimated 40 to 45 million people are direct descendants of Genghis Khan, demonstrating that this dynasty's influence extended far beyond its time. The epitome of power of the House of Borjigin is one of the most important events in human history. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you all for watching. If there's a historical figure you'd like to see featured next, or if you have any thoughts to share, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next video.